And now that I can confirm that's the case, we can get started. Welcome, Kirk.
Excellent. Hi, Boria. Thanks so much for having me. Excited to discuss and get started. Um, I guess we should go. We should go for it.
Yeah, I would say we should go for it. Usually people show up. When people are late, they just show up and start listening.
No problem. Yeah, if people trickle in, that's totally fine. We're going to do a little bit of a presentation to start, and then afterwards, I'd love to open it up for questions if people have any. Usually there's some good questions and topics to discuss afterwards because the metaverse is big, and I admittedly only know a little niche of it, and everyone knows their own niche, and that's what makes it special. So yeah, all right, let's get started. First off, yeah, my name is Kirk Finkel or UntitledXYZ. I'm an artist and a metaverse architect and lead architect at the Museum of Crypto Art. And today, this is actually my seventh time doing a workshop with VCA, which is pretty wild. Time really does fly. And usually in these talks, I do a little bit of a presentation on my own work and how I kind of got here in the first place. And then a little bit in the second half of the presentation, it's more about architecture itself and how the metaverse is evolving around those topics. So let's get going. And let me know if you can't see my screen at all. I think it's sharing okay.
Yes.
But yes, excellent, excellent. So my first entry into the blockchain scene was in 2016. I have a background in traditional architecture and urban design. And while I was working as an architect, I actually did my first blockchain talk presenting architecture as it relates to design practice. And I'm very grateful that this wasn't recorded because it was probably terrible and it was probably full of inaccuracies. But this was me being, I was super excited about what the blockchain world was offering or really beginning to offer. There wasn't much in the way of kind of a blockchain metaverse scene yet, but it held this promise of kind of a different way to look at more equitable voices, getting more people to the table, changing stakeholder relationships. And for me, as an urban designer, I did a lot of town hall meetings with different communities to try to think about how do we build better neighborhoods. So to me, blockchain in the beginning was just so exciting as a way to kind of demonstrate how we look at collectively building things. And so my very first project in the blockchain scene was on a blockchain called Steem. And this was a blogging platform where you could basically interact and you were rewarded with cryptocurrencies depending on your interactions with other people through a blog. And so I thought it was an interesting way to kind of gather feedback from people, encourage people, and incentivize them to collaborate with one another. But as social media goes, without going too far into Steem, it collapsed in a pretty spectacular way because if you incentivize people too much on social media, that gets really icky and really controversial pretty quickly. But for me, in the beginning, it was a really interesting way to do a project I called Steamtown. And Steamtown was where I asked people to submit ideas for a collective town. And I started just by having a blog post where I asked people to submit ideas for new buildings. And then I would model them in 3D and assemble them in a kind of a town idea. And this was really my first art project slash architecture project in the crypto scene. And for me, it was a way to kind of collectively visualize what a small town could look like if it was made up of all these different people, all these different backgrounds from all over the world. It was really interesting to do that. And it was kind of an exercise for me to get more acquainted with the technology, but also to learn more about the people that were using blockchain. And it was such an incredibly diverse and interesting range of people from all over the place. Um, so that got me thinking more about kind of the metaverse and what this could look like. I didn't really know that term yet at this time, but I was very curious about how this could take shape physically or virtually. I mean, in a 3D way. And so that kind of led me into sort of a more distinct style in how I build. I started to create these building parts that different users could assemble themselves into buildings. So that sort of took shape as this kind of collaborative building kit that people could create their own buildings and submit them themselves. And I was doing this kind of Steamtown evolved to Blocktown in 2018. And then in the years after that, I started exploring more of this kind of modular aesthetic of building and using more artwork to explore what architecture could look like. In the previous image, you saw that, buildings started to look a little bit less like buildings and a little bit weirder. And I wanted to kind of explore that further and think about, well, if we're designing virtually, what can a building really begin to look like? If we're not constrained by any of the same typical constraints, how would that impact the way that we look at stairs, windows, doorways, and slabs and walls? And what would that mean for a building? So that drives a lot of my artistic practice today, thinking about how do we conceptualize architecture using building elements and things that we're familiar with, using kind of the memory of physical building, and then starting to transfer that into a kind of virtual aesthetic or a virtual environment. So a lot of my artwork now are really starting points for me to think about virtual building and metaverse architecture, thinking about how structure might act if it didn't have to provide structure, if it didn't have to provide stability for a building. So in this work, the premise really of this piece was thinking about how a column might react if it didn't have to go from A to B, if it didn't have to go from top to bottom to hold up a pedestal or hold up a floor or hold up a building altogether. Columns might act a little bit more playfully, a little bit more curiously, and kind of explore themselves. So I like to think of my art in that way, of these kind of explorations of what a more traditional building element might do if it had to confront a virtual place. And this is a more recent piece. I'm really starting to get more into thinking about scale. And I think there are a lot of different topics, beyond the gravity, beyond the kind of materiality. There's a lot to do with scale that I'm really excited about in the metaverse because it is very modular. And I think we're still at the very beginning about how virtual environments can be experienced and what we can build in them. So those creations have really been kind of a way for me to think about studies, almost study models for virtual building. And real quick, before we get into some of those buildings, the term metaverse actually started far, far before any of this. Started, as many of you probably know, through a novel called Snow Crash by Neal Stephenson. And this was in 1992. And blockchain metaverses, while this is a newer thing over the last few years, of course, virtual worlds have been around for a while. Whether that's Second Life or Minecraft or The Sims even, I think how we connect and immerse ourselves digitally has been around for a while in different iterations. And now it's just very interesting because this new term has really captured the public imagination, but it has a very long legacy to it. And I think it's important to always call that out, that the metaverse isn't necessarily new. It's just part of a long line of iterations of how the internet is evolving. And for me, that evolution really kicked off in 2020 for me. I was in crypto voxels in like 2018, but it didn't really immerse me. It didn't really like latch onto me until I got into Somnium space. This is the first selfie I ever took in Somnium. And this was through a arts district that was created by the Museum of Crypto Art at the time. And they were giving out parcels to different builders who wanted to create a gallery. And so it became this kind of district of all these different galleries that were so cool and so interesting. And it wasn't until I really experienced that it was the first time for me really that I thought, oh, this is like a real collective exercise. It reminded me of what I was trying to do with Blocktown and Steamtown, but the tools are already there. Everyone's already building, and they're building incredible things. So for me, Somnium Space, this is when I first put on a VR headset. That architecture became real. It became kind of a one-of-one scale thing that I could explore, and that really was a radical shift for me. And of course, the metaverse itself is composed of many different worlds, many different aesthetics. This is Crypto Voxels, I think in 2020 also. This is around the same time I was jumping around in Somnium Space. And this is Pranksyland. And this was a really crazy exhibition, basically, of all these different artists who were doing something similar to Mocha, where they were all given kind of a plot to build and to showcase art. And the result was amazing. There were tons of people that showed up to this, very prominent crypto artists who you all might recognize from this screenshot alone. And it was a really beautiful event and really insane to see what people were building in Crypto Voxels at the time. To me, Crypto Voxels has always been kind of like, almost Berlin in the 90s. It's like all these warehouses, empty warehouses where people were making incredible art and exploring and experimenting with amazing things. To me, CV has always been that kind of raw testing ground that was so cool. It wasn't really though until Somnium that I started to see more architecture take place. But for art, I feel like CV has an incredible history to it. And Decentraland, of course, as well. Every world has its own kind of aesthetic, its own approach to how buildings can look and feel. This is in the background of this. This is a project I worked on, I created in last year called Forms, where they're kind of modular building parts similar to Blocktown that you can assemble together in Decentraland. Of course, now these worlds are changing. Some of them are land-based, some of them are not. Mona is a really beautiful example of a land-free virtual world, land-free metaverse where anyone can build, anyone can tokenize an environment. Arium is another example where you don't have land, you just create a kind of spatial website and people can visit it and explore and be all together in one place. And I really love that there's this dynamic between those two approaches right now. I think in the beginning, the metaverse was everyone was thinking about land in a very literal way and in the way that we think about physical land, physical real estate. But if the virtual realm is endless, then, we might not necessarily need to build the exact same way. This is another project I was involved in called VR Museum, and this is a sculpture that I installed as part of it. This was created by Secondary Bounce, and they just had this incredible exhibit of amazing virtual pieces. This is all in VR. I can send a link to this. It's free to download. It's actually not blockchain based, but it is a virtual environment that anyone can access, and it's just crazy cool. It's really beautiful. So, the metaverse, everyone will tell you a slightly different definition of what this is. To me, at the moment, and I've been doing this talk for a little bit, and my definition always changes a little bit as we go. But the metaverse to me is an encompassing term. It's an umbrella term that really is the next iteration of the internet. It's a composite of all of these different virtual worlds all together. Now, other people might say that, you can create your own metaverse. I think that's fine. I think we're all figuring out what the language means. But to me, when I use it, I tend to use it as an umbrella term to define the future of how the internet is taking shape spatially. Um, but I just wanted to throw that in there because I think everyone has their own definition of what this movement is and what it encapsulates. So architecture itself. Let's dive into a little bit more of examples of architecture and what it might mean to build in this virtual environment. I think we spoke before about how when you build virtually, you're not constrained by the same things as you are a physical building. You're not constrained by gravity. You're not constrained by materiality, by weather. So what is architecture then really? What does it do if it isn't dedicated to providing shelter? What can it look like? What purpose does it serve? So I think these are interesting questions that we're still very early on in figuring out the answers to. And what's beautiful about this is we're all collective participants and builders of the metaverse. So we all get to decide. That's something that is a working definition, and it's not up to any one influencer to tell you what this can be. It's really up to you to explore and experiment with these new terms, and we might need a new terminology or a new kind of definition of architecture if we're experiencing things spatially on the internet. This is me as I am building the Agora, which is the Museum of Crypto Art build in Somnium space. For this particular building, I was really interested in taking the kind of framework of a QR code and then extruding different parts of it, making these kind of like voids and spaces within a building that could be used to host art. I didn't want walls. I didn't want typical kind of circulation of a building. I wanted it to be more of a collage of a space that had these different pockets and voids where you can experience art very intimately and on a large kind of big scale. So this is something that we'll explore actually in the next class. We're going to explore this build. But it's a really, for me, this was a big project. This was my first real large scale build, I would say, in the metaverse. And for me, it was a way to explore some of these topics of kind of scale, of gravity, of environment and context. And with all of my builds, I really try to embrace the kind of local environment, if there is one. And in Somnium space, the lighting is just so beautiful. The sun is really impressive, and these kind of day to night cycles are a big part of the building, just as much as the art, in my opinion. It really helps the building and the architecture come to life. This build is right on the waterfront, so there's some cool ways that you can use instead of walls, make the texture of the water frame the art. Use the mountainsides and the clouds to kind of be a part of the art or play off of it. And I think that's something that there's still so much potential to explore deeper. Is this kind of virtual vernacular? What does the language of the building look like in these kind of lands and these new worlds, and what can that be? Somnium space itself, when you're in the full VR app, it's really gorgeous, it's really beautiful, and it's super immersive. Though that said, I still think it's very much based on reality. It's based off of waterside land, mountains in the distance, and clouds in the sky. So I think this is still early in the sense of we're looking at a world that we know. This is a mirror of what already exists. That's not necessarily good or bad, but it's definitely something that I think we have an opportunity to explore and push further. And one of the big things with any of these builds, back to kind of the beginnings of Blocktown or Steamtown for me, these are social places. This is social architecture. And one of the most beautiful things about the metaverse is that whatever you're creating is inherently a public space. It's an environment for people to gather from all over the world. That's one of the kind of magic benefits of blockchain. And it's a really special opportunity to gather voices who can assemble in a place all together at a click of a button. And you can do that on social media apps today, but it's not as dynamic as being there in person with someone who you can speak with and really see people. I think there's kind of a human element to that that's really unique, special, and offers a ton of value with how we can look at, what can we learn from one another, what can we share with one another, and help improve things in total. So this is an artist talk at the Museum of Crypto Art. And we walked around the museum and heard from different artists who were on display. And for me, this was just like a magical moment because you can really meet people, speak with people. You don't have the ticket cost of a museum. You can go there for free at the click of a button. And that's a powerful change and a powerful new dynamic that I think we really should hold on to. And not lose track of. I think it's that open and accessible new world that we're building that is really important. And for the Museum of Crypto Art, I know it is one of our highest values is access and self-sovereignty of the artist, the collector, and everything in between. This is a exhibit for Hackatao. It's a solo exhibit for a 3D work called Hack of the Bear. And I'll hopefully this plays okay. I took a time lapse of this kind of new Pantheon that I built just to show a little bit of the kind of environment in Somnium space itself. This is a time lapse. You can see the Oculus and the sun kind of tracing around the interior of the dome as the sun sets. And there's just a lot of different kind of environment to play with. And this is another example of incorporating the kind of local sun patterns, basically, in a build and making that as part of the art. This was a really beautiful project by Hackatao, and I was honored to be able to build an environment, build a space to house it. And this was actually a 3D rendering off of a 2D drawing by Leonardo da Vinci. And I know that's a lot to swallow, but this was through Christie's auction house. They created a auction around the Leonardo da Vinci drawing, a sketch of a bear, and asked Hackatao to create a modern interpretation of that bear head. So that's what's happening here. You can see on the ground the bear drawing the sketch, but really highlighting the 3D bear above it as a kind of projection. And so we took, another Italian reference, which is the Pantheon, a kind of timeless piece of architecture, and tried to think of it how it would interact in the virtual world. Let's see. I have to wait until the very end. And then we go to the next one. Change. All right, let's try this. So here's another piece, a gallery of crypto art, which is actually, we haven't done any exhibits here yet, but this is another example for me of, really embracing the local kind of context and using light, using shadow, and playing with that as part of the architecture. And this is me literally on a swivel chair in VR, spinning around very slowly while holding the record button. And so you have to get clever in some ways with how you record some of this stuff. And I try not to catch my feet of my avatar running in this. So you'll see clever cuts there to kind of avoid seeing my bobbing head running by. So this was a lot of different tries using a swivel chair. But yeah, I think it's really interesting to kind of try to record these buildings and think about how do you capture some of this architecture that is so immersive. It's hard to record it and capture it in a 2D setting. And it's so much more immersive when you have a VR headset on. So I think we're still very early with how we share these things because we're still very reliant on things like Twitter to share virtual spaces. So I think that's another challenge that's really interesting. Let's see. I guess this is how Google does it with these. Here's another example. I'll try to mute it as well. But this is the Silvermine Arts Gallery, another example of kind of using a blend of things. This was actually one of my more traditional builds, and looking at a real gallery in Connecticut in the US, which had these incredible kind of black beams and trusses and structures that I wanted to kind of recreate in a virtual setting, take out the walls and really make it kind of a place where you can see and experience crypto art, and really embrace the kind of natural elements of Somnium space. So this is an exhibit curated by Snow Crash. And in the middle of filming, it rains. You get a rainstorm here, and you get day to night cycles. And I think it's just such a beautiful way to think about architecture, and really embracing that and thinking about how it can affect and impact what you create. And I just threw this in there as well. This was a show that Nicole actually curated, I believe, and with the Museum of Crypto Art. And this was with the Processing Org Foundation. It was a show on generative art. So I made this spiral staircase that you could kind of ascend and look through different art in, also without walls, and also thinking about how, generative architecture can take shape in physical form. So Web 3D, this is really back to the original point here. It's a new public realm. I don't know if it's actually architecture. If it's not providing shelter, what is this? What do we even call this? I know it's been exceptionally difficult for me to talk to traditional architects and convince them that this is real architecture. So it's a really interesting challenge here to think about, well, what are we building and what is it doing? What is its function? To me, first and foremost, it's definitely a new public realm. And the spatial web is inherently a lot more collaborative and connected than the flat 2D web that we're used to browsing from top to bottom in. So I think this Web 3 or 3D kind of place is just so exciting, and there's just so much potential for it as we look ahead. So I always include this image. If it is a public realm, we have a lot of responsibilities. This was a Black Lives Matter march that I attended in CryptoVoxels. And you could see along this march, people had installed graffiti. Justice for Floyd is on the left. And I think there's just incredible opportunity to use the metaverse to amplify voices who are often underheard. And I think that's going to be an incredibly important part of how this spatial web evolves. And if it is a new public realm, we do have a lot of responsibility to make sure that it doesn't repeat the same mistakes of the physical world. To me, one of the kind of a thesis really about what the metaverse is or could be looks back in time. We can look back to the 90s for Snow Crash, for examples, and we can look even further. This is 1971, a continuous monument which was created by Super Studio, a collective of architects out of Italy. And these architects were, at the time in the 70s, thinking about materials, thinking about consumerism, thinking about the environment, and thinking really about the human connection, and how technology and how architecture can be a way for us to connect and amplify that connection, that human connection with one another. To me, I think this is the point of the metaverse. It has to be around how we amplify our connections with one another, with people who we could have otherwise never met. And I think this is really a kind of critical part of the metaverse and that ethos. It also looks a lot like CryptoVoxels to me. So I think there's a lot to learn from the grid. And I'm certainly a guilty lover of the grid in my own work. I'm obsessed with it, and I can't get out of it. But that's something that I think we need to constantly remind ourselves of, is like, what is the point? What are we building towards here? And what makes it different than what we already have? So looking ahead, this is a project that I've been working on with the Museum of Crypto Art, and I wanted to give you guys a couple looks into what we're building and a little bit under the hood here. With the Museum of Crypto Art, we are working on a project called Rooms. And rooms are interoperable architecture. So these are one-of-one architectural galleries that you can collect, that you can curate, and that you can broadcast or stream across different virtual worlds. And this is something I've been working on with our tech team at the Museum of Crypto Art for the better part of a year, really. And I'm incredibly excited about this because it's going to be a platform that anyone can submit to. If you're a 3D builder, an architect, an artist, and want to create your own interpretation of what a virtual gallery should be, we want your ideas. We want to publish them and reward you for them. So we're trying to build a platform here that really highlights experimentation in architecture and tries to take that to a new level. It also comes with a ton of really powerful curation tech that I think will make galleries themselves very easy to curate, very accessible, and super, super interesting. We're even building a AI-powered avatar that will help curate your exhibit for you and greet people when you enter it, which will be crazy. And I really would love to program my curator to yell at people if they get too close to the artwork. But our devs, I don't know if they're going to actually implement that, but I'd love to see an angry curator running around. That would be fun. So rooms themselves, these are some of the graphics and designs that I've worked on so far. We have a lot more under the hood that are coming very soon. But each of these builds tries to explore a little bit of the themes that we've discussed before of modularity, of kind of past references and deconstructing those references to mean something else. So taking a column and thinking about it, if it doesn't have to provide structure, what does it do? Does it provide decoration? Does it provide reference? Does it provide scale? All these different questions. So I wanted to do a quick video here showing how our app that we have already, this is live, how you can take a room, a 3D environment, and outfit it with artwork. So you can curate solo or group shows. You can actually do a handshake with multiple wallets or different addresses to create shows with groups. And then you can outfit these builds with artwork of your choice and then drop them into a virtual world. So this is an example with Webaverse. And with Webaverse, and I'll talk a little bit about Webaverse in a minute, but you can drag and drop this directly into the world and then explore around it. And I think this is Webaverse I'm just so impressed with because they've built their own engine. This is not based on Unity. This is not based on anything else. This is totally open source, and anyone can grab it off of GitHub and create their own virtual world, an entirely independent app that has all the bells and whistles that Webaverse has. So we're working on a mechanism now that will allow you to stream your room directly into one of these worlds. Let's see here. So here's another example of a Webaverse scene with a room, and this is actually Renee, who's flying around as a tree creature here, and it's just really exciting because I think these open source projects are going to really amplify and explode the kind of creativity that's possible across the metaverse and what you can create with it. And again, I just want to emphasize this is an open source project. It's not a closed metaverse. It's not land-based. It's anyone can grab it and create whatever they want in it. So we literally just grabbed a few of their building parts here and spun up our own virtual world that I'll share in the chat in a little bit. Anyone can walk around it. And I think this kind of thing is just really powerful for curation of art, for experiencing digital art, and for architecture too. This is really the future that I think is incredibly powerful, incredibly exciting. And of course now, let's see. So last points here before we open up for discussion. Let's look more ahead. Let's look further ahead down the rabbit hole, because I think big things are coming. The metaverse is at a interesting intersection, at a very important crossroads with how it develops, how it gets consumed, and are the values around that consumption. What do we want to choose? I believe that there's going to be a bit of a split between the metaverse incorporated version and the open metaverse. And we're seeing this already. There's a bit of the kind of closed metaverse technology that is proprietary, that is owned by a single company and operated by a single company. But then there's the kind of metaverse that is open and accessible, open source driven, community generated or user generated content. And I think there's going to be a bit of a battle between these two. So to me, I know I said before, I think there's one metaverse. I do kind of think there's two. So the metaverse moves so quickly that throughout this presentation, I'm going to change my own perspective. I think there's two. There's going to be the kind of open metaverse and then the closed metaverse. So the hottest example of what I believe is a closed metaverse, although that remains to be seen, is Otherside. These will be some screenshots that I took from an Otherside demo, where for those who aren't familiar, this is probably one of the most well-funded projects, web projects in history. Billions of dollars are behind this, and it is a land-based metaverse, but I know there will be user-based contributed content. So I think there's a lot of dynamics that will play out here that will kind of battle that ethos of, is it closed, is it open, and if the engine that powers the other side isn't open source or isn't accessible, then is it a metaverse, or is it like, what is it? How do we define it? To me, it's gorgeous. It was beautiful. And these are screenshots that I took just walking around. I think it's really impressive what they've been able to do by getting so many users in one place, in one world. But at what cost? What are we aiming for here when we do this? And where does the money go? Where does the attention go? And how does that shake out? So I think ultimately this is a healthy kind of battle for how the metaverse unfolds. It's just important for all of us to really keep in mind what the purpose is for any of this and what we're building towards. That said, I can critique a lot of the other side, but it really was beautiful, and it really was cool to kind of walk around it and be there with. You can see in the upper right corner there were 4,541 people there all together, and I think that number got closer to 5,000 at one point, and it was smooth, and it was on my web browser. It was on my laptop. My laptop never got overheated. It never crashed. It went extremely, surprisingly smooth for this demo. So the other side is not live yet. This was a closed demo, but so we will see. There's a lot remains to be seen. And of course, I said before, Webaverse is almost the antithesis of that. It's the opposite approach. It is a totally open source, totally accessible world that anyone can create lots of different types of virtual experiences around their place. And it's not necessarily land-based in how they do it. It's a little bit more of like the small town approach, where everyone's kind of holding hands, walking around, having picnics in the metaverse, and teaching and learning from one another in their own kind of funky avatar ways. And before, that's in contrast to all these kind of robots that look the same, though I know that will be different in the final one. But you can really learn a lot from how these projects pitch themselves and how they pitch their ethos and their vision. So this is me walking through Webaverse, I think that's really it for this talk. I think next time we're going to actually explore some metaverses. So instead of me going through slides, we'll be going through experiences that we can all jump through together. That'll be a fun field trip for all of us to explore and learn more about lots of different, not my projects, but other people's projects that I think are really important to experience and visit and learn from in the metaverse. But yeah, I think that's all I have for today, and I guess we can open it up for questions if people have any questions. I'd love to hear.
Maybe let's check if we have any questions in the chat.
Oh yeah, here we go. Oh, there's a lot of chatting. I'm sorry, I totally missed all this. Okay, I'll scroll up a little bit here and see. 4,000 people, are they running instances? This is for the other side. They're not running instances. That was a single instance. So that's what's really impressive about the other side tech is their whole philosophy is that they want to have 10,000, 20,000 users interacting all in one place. That's very different than something like a Fortnite where they would have, it was like the Travis Barker a show where they supposedly had like hundreds of thousands of people, but that was split across thousands of instances. So they simulated a show with hundreds of thousands, but their technology, even in Fortnite, can't host that many people in one place. So that's a really, really important distinction. And that is really impressive about what they're building with other side. The issue for me is that it's proprietary. So it's a little bit tricky. We can't just spin up our own version of that. And I think the world would probably be better if we could. Let's see, from Yuri, which apps sites do you suggest to use for building? Yes, great question. I actually have a list that I'm working on for the next talk that I'm doing, not to tease it to the next one. But since we're doing a field trip for that one, I'll end it with a huge list of places to go, resources to explore, because I think it'll be easier if you see each world, you can gravitate to which ones are useful for building. But off the bat, I guess I could answer a couple of, let's see. I think HyperFi is one of the like most underrated right now, personally. Very few people know what HyperFi is. HyperFi, Monaverse, I'll post a link to HyperFi. Monaverse is incredible. Webaverse, obviously, I think is great. And I think with HyperFi, it's probably one of the most user-friendly ones. It's similar. Arium, also, I have to say, Arium is really brilliant and easy to use. It's similar to HyperFi in that everything is kind of a web app-based experience. The only difference is actually HyperFi does charge you to basically have a ticket into a world. It's 0.06 ETH, and I believe Arium is free. So Arium, Mona is free. Spatial is free. And I think there are bells and whistles you can add on to Spatial, but I believe that one's free as well. So I think the free worlds are bringing a lot of healthy competition to this. So that'll be good. Forces says, can Mocha rooms be deployed in Monaverse currently? Not currently, but we are working with them to make that happen. Rooms are designed to be broadcasted or streamed across virtual worlds. So your wallet will basically read the room ID, the token ID of the room, and then be able to call it so that you can open it up into any world that you own or that you want to experience it in. So the APIs that we have behind it, a little bit of technical stuff, but what we have behind it will allow you to do that. And we are working actively with the Monaverse team to incorporate it. But we will be going live with that hopefully soon. And yeah, I'm just super excited about that. And also another question, any video game architecture that influenced you and your style? Ooh, good question. I think for me, I was really into like Roller Coaster Tycoon and like Age of Empires back in the day. I don't know if anyone knows those games, But those kind of world building games were just like modular and fun to create whole civil, like Civ 4 was a big one when I was growing up, or Civ 3, or I don't know, I guess all of them. But those games were just really interesting world building games. It made the metaverse make sense to me because the ability to play those games with other people was just really exciting. And I think that's where we're headed with a lot of these things, that it'll start to be, these pseudo competitions, social experiences. The metaverse will be all of this stuff all put together. I'm going to keep scrolling up here. Reverse was saying, I've done some stuff in VR chat and the Wave XR before, but it was all instances. Yeah, I think instances are a really cool way to scale an experience. But it is, I think a lot of these metaverse projects are trying to create a single instance to really pull everyone together in one place. Other side, we will see if it does it. It's still not live yet, but these things will take time. But I do think we're probably headed towards something like that. Let's see. Forces, thank you for sharing all these links in there. That's awesome. All these links are perfect. Yeah, Mona, honestly, Mona is just like a beautiful environment, and they have such a friendly builder community. Highly recommend exploring them, joining their Discord. They're great. And so Victor has a great question. How do you handle Polygon count when you are building? That is the hidden, there aren't material challenges necessarily in the virtual world, but there are Polygon constraints. I tend to build modularly in that I can kind of predict a little bit easier how complex a build will be. So you'll see a lot of my stuff, if I can go back to like something like this, I can kind of predict from a build that looks like this how many polygons it will have. And that modular kind of building technique allows me to think about, okay, well, I know, if I want to hit 20,000 polygons for a Decentraland build that has 2x2 plots, I can kind of guesstimate at this point how many polygons I can get away with. I also build with a lot of linear faces, and curves are very expensive. So you'll see me do a lot of flat surfaces or try to kind of like trick to do something that has curves. But I think it's a mix. It's a lot of trial and error to figure out, depending on the world that you're building to, if a build can be compatible. That's a huge constraint. That and collider objects are really challenging, the biggest challenges for making a build compatible with the virtual world. Reverse is asking, what softwares are you using to make your modular designs? Great question. I used Rhinoceros 3D, Rhino, and a little bit of Grasshopper, and a little bit of Blender. And those are the traditional tools I used in my architecture practice back in the day. And yeah, I think Rhino is just, to me, Rhino's unfortunately not free. I think Blender is by far the most metaverse compatible software, and it's open source and it's free. Blender is very good. And most of the tutorials on any metaverse platform will include a tutorial around Blender. Yeah, I had a Rhino bootleg for a very long time, an embarrassingly long amount of time. Rhino is just so precise, so it's very different to me than Blender, because you can do such very precision-based modeling. And for me, it's easier for modular building because you can, it just makes it, there's more kind of an approach to kind of just precision, I guess. And Victor asked, can you use some kind of architectural assets to use instances so you reduce the polygon count? You can, if I understand the question correctly, you can definitely, like, lots of libraries exist where you can download low poly objects to incorporate in your builds. It's totally possible with different libraries that are open source or have CC0 building units. I think there's a lot of tutorials around, memory wise. Yeah, actually, so you can do, in Rhino, you can create blocks, which I use pretty frequently. Blocks are a way to kind of create a modular unit and then repeat them across a build, and then you can actually update that unit and it'll update across the entire build. So that's a good way to do that, and it kind of makes it a little bit easier on your computer in some cases. Um, so Reverse asks, do you need to use Unity or Unreal Engine with an SDK to build in some of these wallet-based metaverses as you've talked about, or are they standalone drag and drop? Really, really good question. And I'll cover a little bit of that actually in the next talk that goes into each metaverse more specifically as a tour. But Unity, you do need to use an SDK. For most of these projects, like for Monaverse, for Somnium Space, they use a Unity SDK to basically upload their builds. And so you can't drag and drop in those. You have to use Unity as a kind of as an intermediary to basically take the model, make it compatible, and go through a check. It'll tell you if you have too many polygons or if your textures are in a resolution that's too high. So those SDKs are very useful. There's a good community around helping people kind of navigate those rules. And great question. Are the SDKs different from one another? Unfortunately, they are. That's, I think, a big bottleneck for the metaverse, of course, right? It's not easy. It's a real pain in the butt. Metaverse interoperability is a huge pain. And I think there aren't consistent building standards across these worlds, and that inhibits a lot of traditional architects from entering into this because it's such a pain to to do this and to make something where you create a place, an environment, and then move it to a different place. That is a bottleneck that we're looking to help solve with rooms, with Mocha rooms, because you can take a single build and what it really does is provide a bucket in the NFT. So you can upload multiple file types like a GLB file or an FBX file. And each of those may be compatible for different apps. So the API that we're building will allow you to call a GLB if it's a GLB-based rendering engine, or an FBX if it's, say, a Unity-based engine or something like that. So yeah, I'm super excited about that. And Reverse says that's one of the main reasons I'm stuck with one metaverse that has a lot of I think that's a huge bottleneck, and it's a problem where I believe metaverse standards will change. And thank you so much. Yeah, if you have to go, that's totally fine. I might actually have to head out in a few minutes myself. But yes, I think it's a huge bottleneck right now. And I think that has to change. We have to come up with better standards for this and better 3D standards. And one good example to keep an eye out for is VRM avatars, because that is becoming more and more adopted across virtual world apps. VRM avatars are basically multi-world compatible avatar skins that you can drag and drop in a lot of different apps or log in with. And I think that's going to become a big thing and a good example for how the future of this changes. Awesome. Yeah, thanks guys for coming. If you're hopping off, that's cool. Ready Player Me, any feelings? I have lots of feelings, but honestly, I need to dig in more to it to learn more. I think in terms of avatars for me, the more open, the better. The more composable, the better. I think I haven't done enough exploring, honestly, into Ready Player Me to have a strong opinion yet, but I'll do more research ahead of our next discussion. As many of you know, it's just like there's so many different worlds to keep track of and so many different projects, but Ready Player Me is obviously a big name right now and something to keep close tabs on. Yeah, I think One cool avatar project to keep an eye out for that, in my opinion, is a little bit more like crypto native is Crypto Avatars. They do interoperable 3D avatars, and they're very cool. You can also submit them as a user and create your own. And they have a very cool token strategy, NFT strategy around that. And it's very cool. But yeah, are there any other questions? Feel free to drop a line in the chat. Of course, afterwards too, if you guys have any questions, feel free to bug me in the residency channel. Or Boria, we might have, if the architecture channel is still active, we could invite this cohort into that if they aren't already.
Yeah, it is. It is still active. It's not entirely active, but I can absolutely give them the access to that right now.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll try to be more active myself in that. I'll drop some contests whenever they come up. And also for the next course, I'll share, there are a handful of Discords. I know, yeah, another Discord. Oh, kill me now. But there are other Discords that are really, really useful for builders. And I'm very active in some of these. They're like different collectives of people who are just sharing building strategies with one another. And those places are just where I learn everything. So I'll share those in a little bit. And they are super helpful, especially the metaverse agnostic ones that are just trying to explore as much as you can.
Fantastic.
Yeah, if there are any, yeah, excellent. I think if that's it, maybe we could wrap. If there are any other questions, let me know.
I'd say we can absolutely wrap. Let's give just one more minute for any last questions if there are any. And while we're waiting, thank you so much, Kirk, for sharing the all these amazing new worlds with us. And it's really, really great that there is so much being built right now. As you mentioned before, it's really cool that we have this healthy. What was the word for that? I just lost it in my mind. Healthy competition. Yeah, and
Yeah,
it's really exciting to see how these worlds work. And as I was speaking to Reverse in one of our one-on-ones, I did mention that one of the best things about these worlds is to try to bug them, to try to break them, because then you find a bunch of secret gateways that even the builders didn't know that they existed, and sometimes they are bugs, and these bugs can actually become really beautiful flowers for the builders.
absolutely. Totally agree. That's such a cool way to hack it too. You can like, everyone, you've got to break it in order to discover the new things that are possible. And I love that. I think that's the core of any good architecture is, find a way to change the rules. And yeah, all this stuff, honestly, it's so early. Everyone's still walking with gravity in these things on land. Like, wait till we can flip gravity and then walk on the ceilings or walk on, have an architecture that moves or changes differently as you move around it. We're still, early days with a lot of this stuff and how these things can go. And I know some platforms give you some chance to do that. I just want to see. Oh, yeah. Well, reverse. I want to see. I want to see the ceiling thing. Awesome. I think that kind of thing, just let's do more of that. It'll be so cool.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thanks so much, Kirk. I would say that we can wrap it up. I would absolutely speak to you about these things for 3 more weeks. So I guess it's great to say bye for now. And where is the best way to reach you?
Oh, excellent. Yes, I will share my Twitter. It's probably the most. Oh, Twitter. It's so unfortunate, but it's pretty important these days. I try to be active on Twitter. and Discord as well. I will be active in the Vertical Crypto Art Discord. So if you message me or ping me there, I will find it. It might take me a minute, but I promise I will find it. So if you have any questions, probably the architecture chat in this Discord is the best way to reach me in combination with Twitter.
Awesome. Okay, well, in that case, thanks everyone for coming. It seems that there was some kind of a mix-up with the calendar invites, so apologies for that. And I will make sure you all have the recording so that everyone can catch up. And also, we're actually going to have a second part of this class soon, so keep your eyes peeled on that.
Excellent. Yeah, I can't wait to do we'll do a little field trip. It'll be a ton of fun.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Okay, thanks everyone. Thanks, Kirk, for sharing your time and knowledge with us. It's been an incredible journey and it's just starting in a way. So thank you from everyone. And thanks everyone for showing up. As I always say, keep creating no matter what time of day it is with you. And see you soon.
Thank you so much, everyone. Take care.